What happens when a high school kid risks his own life to save a helpless, battered old man from a brutal mugging? He expects a quiet thank you. He absolutely does not expect the most notorious motorcycle club in the world to show up. This is a story of blood, ironclad loyalty, and the Hells Angels. The neon sign of the Starlight Diner buzzed with a relentless, maddening hum, flickering against the rain-slicked pavement of Route 9 in the dead of a Tuesday night. It was 2:15 a.m. 17-year-old Leo Harrison wiped down the laminate counter for the fourth time, his eyes burning with exhaustion. Leo wasn't supposed to be working the graveyard shift. He had a calculus exam in exactly 6 hours, but his mother's medical bills were piling up on the kitchen table like a mountain he couldn't climb, and the diner's manager paid under the table for the hours after midnight. Aside from Leo, the diner was mostly a ghost town. In the corner booth sat the only customer, an old man named Arthur. Leo didn't know his last name, but Arthur had been coming in every night for the past week. He was a frail-looking man in his late 60s, wearing a faded, oversized flannel shirt, frayed denim, and worn-out engineer boots. He had a scruffy, salt-and-pepper beard and hands that shook slightly as he lifted his porcelain coffee mug. Despite his ragged appearance, there was a quiet dignity about him. He never complained, always tipped a crisp $5 bill on a $2 coffee, and spent hours staring out the rain-streaked window into the dark parking lot. Leo poured the last of the decaf into Arthur's mug. "You heading home soon? Arthur Storm's getting worse." Arthur looked up, his pale blue eyes carrying a heavy, unspoken exhaustion. "Soon enough, kid. Just waiting out the worst of it. The bones don't like the damp much anymore." As he reached into his pocket to pull out his wallet, Arthur's flannel sleeve rode up. Leo caught a brief glimpse of a faded, blown-out tattoo on his forearm, skulls and wings, indistinguishable from decades of sun and age. But what caught the attention of the wrong people was the wallet. It was thick, bursting with cash. Sitting a few booths down, previously unnoticed by Leo, were two men, Brad Miller and Greg Daly. They were local fixtures in the worst way possible petty thieves, meth heads, and opportunists who scavenged the outskirts of town looking for easy prey. Leo saw Brad nudge Greg, their eyes locked on Arthur's hands. 10 minutes later, Arthur slowly stood up, left his customary $5 bill on the table, and shuffled out the glass front doors into the pouring rain. Leo watched him go, a sudden pit forming in his stomach. He glanced at the booth where Brad and Greg had been sitting. It was empty. They had slipped out the side door. "Hey, boss, I gotta take the trash out," Leo shouted to the cook in the back. Without waiting for an answer, Leo grabbed the heavy steel mag-light flashlight from beneath the cash register, kept there for emergencies, and pushed through the back door into the freezing alleyway. The rain was deafening, bouncing off the metal dumpsters. At first, Leo saw nothing but shadows. Then, he heard the sickening thud of bone hitting brick, followed by a wheezing gasp. He broke into a sprint, rounding the corner of the brick building. Under the flickering amber light of a busted street lamp, he saw them. Brad had Arthur pinned against the rough brick wall, his forearm pressed brutally into the old man's throat. Greg was ripping through Arthur's pockets, tearing the flannel shirt in the process. "Give it up, old man. Where's the wallet?" Greg snarled, pulling a switchblade from his pocket and flicking it open with a sharp click. The steel caught the dim light. Arthur wasn't begging. Despite the arm crushing his windpipe, he was staring at Brad with an eerie, icy calm. "You boys are making a mistake," Arthur rasped, blood trickling from his split lip. "A permanent one." "Shut up," Brad roared, drawing his fist back to strike the old man in the face. Leo didn't think. If he had stopped to weigh the odds, a skinny 17-year-old high school student against two desperate, armed criminals, he would have run back inside and dialed 911. But seeing the blade, and seeing the blood on Arthur's face, a primal surge of adrenaline took over. "Hey!" Leo screamed, his voice cracking slightly but echoing loud enough over the rain. Brad and Greg whipped their heads around. "Back off, I already called the cops," Leo lied, raising the heavy metal mag light. His hands were shaking, but he planted his feet firmly on the wet asphalt. Greg laughed, stepping away from Arthur and twirling the knife. "Look at this. The diner boy wants to be a hero. Turn around and walk back inside. Kid, this ain't your business." "Let him go," Leo demanded, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Brad sneered and shoved Arthur violently to the ground. The old man hit the wet pavement hard, groaning as his head struck a puddle. Brad cracked his knuckles and took a step toward Leo. "I'm gonna break your jaw, kid." Brad lunged. He was fast, swinging a wild right hook aimed straight at Leo's temple. But Leo was quicker. He ducked under the wild punch, gripping the heavy flashlight with both hands, and swung it upward with everything he had. The solid aluminum barrel connected with Brad's jaw with a horrific crack. Brad's eyes rolled back, and he dropped to the asphalt like a sack of cement, entirely unconscious. Greg froze, staring at his friend on the ground. The smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a feral, cornered animal rage. He raised the switchblade, stepping over Brad's body. "I'm gonna gut you for that." Leo backed up, raising the flashlight defensively, knowing he couldn't dodge a knife. "The cops are literally a minute away, sirens. Man, listen. It was a bluff, but the distant sound of a semi-truck air horn on the highway played right into it." Greg hesitated, glancing toward the street. He looked back at Leo, committing his face to memory. "You're dead, kid," Greg spat, his voice pure venom. "You hear me? You're a walking corpse." He grabbed Brad by the collar, dragging his groggy, moaning friend toward the darkness of the adjacent lot. Leo stood frozen until they completely disappeared into the rain. The adrenaline drained from his system instantly, leaving him gasping for air, his knees threatening to buckle. He dropped the flashlight and rushed over to Arthur. "Arthur, are you okay? Don't move. I'm calling an ambulance." Leo fumbled in his apron for his phone. Suddenly, a surprisingly strong hand gripped Leo's wrist. It was Arthur. The old man pushed himself up into a sitting position, wiping the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. "No cops, no ambulances," Arthur said, his voice surprisingly steady for a man who had just been beaten. "But you're bleeding. They had a knife." "I said no cops. Leo," Arthur repeated, using the boy's name for the very first time. He looked directly into Leo's eyes, and for a second, the frail old man vanished, replaced by someone incredibly hardened and dangerous. "I don't involve the law in my affairs." Leo helped him to his feet. Arthur brushed the dirt off his ruined flannel. He reached into his pocket, the one Greg hadn't managed to empty, and pulled out a heavy, tarnished silver coin. He pressed it into Leo's palm. It had a strange insignia etched into it, a winged skull wearing a motorcycle helmet. "You're a brave kid, Leo," Arthur said quietly. "Stupid, but brave. You shouldn't have risked your neck for me." "I couldn't just watch them hurt you," Leo said, looking down at the heavy coin. "Keep that in your pocket," Arthur instructed, his tone dead serious. "If those scavengers come back for you, and they will, You show that to whoever you need to. You tell them Arthur sent you. You understand?" Before Leo could ask what that meant, Arthur turned and limped away into the downpour, leaving Leo alone in the alley with nothing but a bloody lip, a bruised flashlight, and a strange silver coin. The paranoia set in the very next morning. Every time the diner door chimed, Leo's heart leaped into his throat. He jumped at shadows walking home from school. He constantly checked the rearview mirror of his rusted 2004 Honda Civic, convinced a truck was tailing him. Greg's final words, "You're a walking corpse," echoed in his head on a relentless loop. Arthur didn't return to the Starlight Diner. Wednesday passed. Then Thursday. The corner booth remained empty, completely devoid of the quiet old man and his decaf coffee. Leo kept the heavy silver coin in his right pocket at all times, rubbing his thumb over the etched skull whenever his anxiety spiked. He tried researching the symbol on the internet between classes, but the results were vague, mostly pointing to vintage military insignias or obscure biker culture. He convinced himself it was just an old war token from a grateful veteran. By Friday night, the fear had begun to morph into a dull ache of exhaustion. It was payday, and Leo was pulling a double shift to make up for the hours he missed studying for his exams. At 3:15 a.m., the manager finally locked the front doors, flipping the neon sign to "Closed." "Good work tonight, Leo," the manager mumbled, tossing a white envelope of cash onto the counter. "See you Sunday." Leo pocketed the envelope, grabbed his backpack, and stepped out the back door into the suffocating humidity of the night. The rain from earlier in the week had vanished, leaving behind a thick, suffocating fog that rolled off the nearby highway. The parking lot was desolate, illuminated by only one flickering sodium bulb. Leo walked toward his Civic, pulling his keys from his pocket. He was 10 feet away when he noticed the shadow standing by his driver's side door. He stopped dead in his tracks. "Hey there! Hero!" A voice hissed from the darkness. Greg stepped into the dim orange light. His face was twisted into an ugly, triumphant sneer. In his right hand, he held a heavy steel tire iron. Leo immediately backed up, looking for a way to bolt back to the diner, but the heavy metal security door had already clicked shut and locked behind him. "Going somewhere," another voice called out. From behind the dumpsters. Brad emerged. His jaw was heavily bruised, swollen to twice its normal size, and his eyes were dark with malice. But they weren't alone. 2 more men stepped out from the shadows near the edge of the lot, blocking the exit to the street. They were large, muscular, and carrying baseball bats, 4 against 1. "I told you, kid," Greg said, casually tapping the tire iron against the hood of Leo's car. Smack. A dent appeared in the cheap metal. "I told you you were dead. Did you really think I'd let some little diner brat crack my boy's jaw and walk away?" "Take my money," Leo said, his voice trembling as he reached into his pocket, pulling out his white pay envelope. "It's $300. Just take it and let me go." Brad laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "We're gonna take your money anyway, kid. But first, we're gonna break both your legs so you can't run out to any more alleys." The 4 men began to close in, forming a tight circle around Leo. The air felt suffocating. Leo's hand drifted to his right pocket, his fingers wrapping around Arthur's silver coin. It felt useless now. A chunk of metal wasn't going to stop 4 men with weapons. He braced himself, raising his fists in a desperate, futile attempt to protect his face. Greg lunged, swinging the tire iron. It struck Leo in the ribs with a sickening crunch. Fire exploded in Leo's side, and he collapsed to the asphalt, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Brad stepped up and delivered a brutal kick to Leo's stomach, sending him rolling onto his back. "Hold him down," Greg commanded, raising the tire iron high above his head, aiming directly for Leo's kneecap. Leo squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the bone-shattering impact. But the blow never came. Instead, a sound tore through the heavy fog. It wasn't a siren. It was a deep, guttural, deafening roar. It sounded like thunder erupting from the concrete itself. Greg froze, looking toward the street. The ground beneath them literally began to vibrate. Out of the thick, grey fog, twin headlights pierced the darkness. Then another pair. And another. 5 massive, custom-built Harley-Davidson motorcycles roared into the Starlight Diner parking lot in a tight, disciplined V formation. Their engines were deafening, a mechanical symphony of raw horsepower that drowned out everything else. They didn't just pull in, they swarmed the area, completely blocking the only exit and trapping the 4 thugs inside the lot. The bikes killed their engines simultaneously, the sudden silence ringing louder than the noise. The riders kicked down their kickstands in unison. They were massive men, broad-shouldered and imposing, wearing heavily worn leather cuts over denim jackets. But it was the patch on their backs that made the blood drain entirely from Greg's face. A winged skull wearing a motorcycle helmet. The exact same insignia etched onto the coin in Leo's pocket. The rockers above and below the skull read 2 words that commanded absolute terror and respect on the streets: Hell's Angels. The leader of the group stepped off his customized road glide. He was a mountain of a man in his late 30s, with a thick beard, intricate tattoos crawling up his neck, and eyes that looked like black ice. On the front of his leather vest, a small patch read President. He didn't rush. He walked with a terrifying, measured calmness toward the group, his heavy boots crunching against the gravel. The other 4 angels flanked him, their hands casually resting near their waistbands, their expressions devoid of any mercy. Brad dropped his baseball bat. It clattered against the asphalt. He took a terrified step back. The president stopped a few feet from Greg, who was still holding the tire iron, though his hand was now visibly shaking. "You fellas seem to be lost," the president said. His voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that didn't need to be loud to be completely dominant. "We ain't got no problem with the club. Man," Greg stammered, raising his free hand in surrender. "This is personal, just taking care of a local dispute." The president looked past Greg, his eyes locking onto Leo, who was still on the ground, clutching his bleeding ribs. The president's expression remained entirely unreadable. "Is your name Leo?" the president asked. Leo, coughing and wincing in pain, managed a weak nod. "Yeah." The president turned his attention back to Greg. The air in the parking lot seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You see, that's where you're wrong," the president said softly, stepping directly into Greg's personal space. "You don't have a local dispute. You have a problem with me." "Why?" Greg stuttered, realizing how catastrophically out of his depth he was. The president smiled, a cold, predatory baring of teeth. "Because earlier this week, you put your hands on my father, and the boy you're about to hit, he saved his life." The president cracked his knuckles, the sound like breaking branches in the silent night. "My name is Jackson. Arthur is my dad. And tonight, you boys are going to learn what happens when you touch family." The silence that followed Jackson's revelation was absolute, save for the rhythmic, metallic ticking of the cooling Harley-Davidson engines. The heavy fog seemed to thicken, pressing down on the parking lot like a suffocating blanket. Greg's face, previously twisted in arrogant malice, completely crumbled. The tire iron slipped from his trembling fingers, hitting the wet asphalt with a hollow, pathetic clang. Brad, still nursing his bruised jaw, was practically hyperventilating, his eyes darting wildly for an escape route that simply did not exist. The other two hired thugs with baseball bats slowly lowered their weapons, utterly paralyzed by the reputation of the men standing before them. "Jackson, please." Greg choked out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "We didn't know. We swear to God, we had no idea he was your father." Jackson didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Ignorance isn't an excuse, Greg. You preyed on an old man. You put a knife in his face for a few crumpled bills. And then you brought 4 men to beat a high school kid to death to cover your bruised ego." Jackson took one deliberate step forward. "That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of men you are." He gave a barely perceptible nod to the 4 massive angels flanking him. It was not a chaotic brawl. It was a terrifyingly systematic, utterly silent dismantling. The angels moved with a brutal, synchronized efficiency, born from decades of surviving the harshest environments. Jackson didn't even lift a finger. He simply turned his back on the thugs as the muffled sounds of bone meeting leather and desperate, gasping pleas echoed through the fog. It was over in less than 60 seconds. Greg, Brad, and their 2 accomplices were left crumpled on the asphalt, groaning in agonizing pain, utterly broken but alive. Jackson walked over to where Leo was struggling to sit up against his rusted Honda Civic. The biker crouched down, his massive frame dwarfing the 17-year-old. The terrifying aura he had projected moments ago softened just a fraction. "You got a broken rib, kid," Jackson said, his gravelly voice oddly gentle as he inspected the way Leo was clutching his side. "Maybe 2. I'll just go to the hospital," Leo stammered, wincing as a sharp spike of pain shot through his chest. "No hospitals," Jackson replied firmly, echoing his father's exact words from nights ago. "Hospitals ask questions. They call the cops. The cops start sniffing around. And suddenly you're wrapped up in a police report with these 4 bottom feeders. You don't want that kind of heat in your life." Jackson extended a large, calloused hand. Leo hesitated for only a second before grasping it. Jackson pulled him to his feet with effortless strength. "My dad said he gave you something," Jackson said, his dark eyes locking onto Leo's. "Let me see it." With trembling fingers, Leo reached into his right pocket and pulled out the heavy silver coin. He held it out in his palm. Jackson stared at the winged skull insignia for a long moment. He reached out and traced the edge of the coin with his thumb. "Do you have any idea what this is?" "Leo," Arthur said. "He said to show it if those guys came back," Leo whispered. "It's called a Reaper's Mark," Jackson explained, his voice thick with reverence. "It's cast from the silver of melted-down motorcycle parts. My old man is a founding member of the Oakland Charter. He doesn't just hand these out. In fact, I've only seen him give one away once in my entire life, and that was to a man who took a bullet for him 30 years ago." Jackson closed Leo's fingers over the coin, pressing it back into the boy's chest. "When you hold that coin, you are a friend of the Hell's Angels. It means you have the absolute protection of this club. Anyone who touches you, touches us. Greg and his crew just learned that the hard way." Leo looked past Jackson to the bruised, defeated men groaning on the ground. The sheer reality of the situation was crashing over him like a tidal wave. He had saved a stranger, and in return, he had accidentally enlisted an army. "Come on," Jackson said, tossing a set of keys to one of his men. "Bobby is going to drive your car to your place. You're riding with me. We have a private doctor who handles club business. He's going to tape those ribs up, and then we're taking you home." Leo didn't argue. He climbed onto the back of Jackson's roaring road glide, clutching the silver coin in his pocket as the convoy of Harleys tore out of the diner parking lot, leaving the Starlight Diner and his nightmare far behind in the rearview mirror. The club's doctor, an older, silent man operating out of a spotless basement clinic on the edge of town, taped Leo's ribs tight and handed him a bottle of prescription painkillers without asking a single question. By the time the convoy pulled up to Leo's rundown apartment complex, the sun was just beginning to bleed over the horizon, painting the smoggy sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. Bobby handed Leo his Honda keys with a stoic nod. Jackson walked Leo to his front door. The apartment was cramped, the peeling paint on the door a stark reminder of the crushing poverty Leo and his mother lived in. "You rest up, kid," Jackson said, adjusting his leather cut. "You don't go back to that diner for a week. Understood?" "I have to," Leo said, a wave of panic washing over him. "I can't miss work. Jackson, my mum, she's got cancer treatments. The bills are piling up. If I miss a week of pay, we lose this apartment. We lose everything." Jackson paused. His dark eyes scanned the dilapidated hallway, taking in the reality of Leo's desperate life. He didn't offer any empty words of pity. He simply nodded slowly. "Get some sleep, Leo," Jackson said quietly. He turned on his heel and walked back to his idling motorcycle, disappearing into the early morning light. For the next 4 days, Leo lived in a haze of painkillers and anxiety. He stayed locked in his apartment, terrified of the mounting debt, terrified of his boss firing him, and terrified for his mother's health. He kept expecting the police to knock on his door regarding the assault at the diner, but the knock never came. On Wednesday afternoon, the phone rang. It was the billing department at St. Jude's Memorial Hospital, where his mother was receiving her oncology treatments. Leo answered with a heavy heart, fully expecting the collection agency threats he was so used to hearing. "Mr. Harrison," the woman on the line asked cheerfully. "I'm calling regarding your mother's outstanding balance." I know. Leo sighed, rubbing his temples. "I just need a few more weeks to get the payment plan." "Oh, no, sweetheart, you don't understand," the woman interrupted. "I'm calling to inform you that the account has been settled. The entire balance." Leo froze. The phone nearly slipped from his grasp. "What? That's $34,000. That's impossible." "It was paid in full yesterday morning," she confirmed, typing loudly on her keyboard. "A cashier's check was hand-delivered to our administrative office." "By who?" Leo breathed, tears suddenly pricking the corners of his eyes. "The donor requested anonymity," she replied, though the gentleman who dropped it off was quite memorable. He was wearing a rather large leather vest and rode a very loud motorcycle. The paperwork was filed under a charitable trust named the Reaper's Mark Foundation. Leo slowly hung up the phone. He pulled the tarnished silver coin from his pocket, the weight of it suddenly feeling heavier, immensely warmer in his palm. The Hells Angels hadn't just protected his life, they had given him his future back. A month later, a cool autumn breeze swept through town. Leo, fully healed and back on his feet, walked into the Starlight Diner for the midnight shift. His mother was resting comfortably at home, her treatments fully covered. He no longer jumped at shadows. He no longer checked his rearview mirror. At exactly 2:15 a.m., the glass door chimed. Leo looked up from wiping the counter. Walking through the door, wearing a pristine new flannel shirt and the same scruffy beard, was Arthur. He moved a little slower, perhaps favoring his left leg a bit more, but his pale blue eyes were as sharp as ever. Flanking him, standing like a silent, towering guardian, was Jackson. The diner fell dead silent. The few patrons in the booths instinctively lowered their eyes, sensing the overwhelming presence of the men who had just walked in. Arthur slowly shuffled over to his usual corner booth and sat down. Jackson stood by the doorway, his arms crossed, giving Leo a subtle, knowing nod. Leo smiled. He grabbed a fresh porcelain mug, filled it to the brim with hot decaf, and walked over to the corner booth. He placed it gently on the table. "On the house tonight, Arthur," Leo said softly. Arthur looked up, a rare, genuine smile cracking through his weathered face. He reached out and gave Leo's wrist a firm squeeze. "Good to see you, kid," Arthur rasped. "Keep that coin safe." "Always," Leo replied. He walked back behind the counter, no longer just a scared kid working the graveyard shift. He was the boy who stood up in the dark, the boy who drew the line, and the boy who earned the unbreakable loyalty of the most dangerous men on asphalt. If this story of raw loyalty, immense bravery, and unexpected brotherhood kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this incredible real-life twist with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping, heart-pounding stories where true justice comes from the most unlikely of places. See you in the next video. Some mistakes leave a bruise, others rearrange your entire life. When Oakhaven High's most arrogant bullies cornered the quiet kid by the bleachers, they thought they were just having fun. They had no idea his older brother wore the winged death head of the Hells Angels. They were dead wrong. Oakhaven High School was the kind of pristine, manicured California campus where wealth dictated your social survival. If your parents were doctors, lawyers, or local real estate moguls, you walked the halls like royalty. If you were Toby Reynolds, you practically didn't exist. At 15, Toby was undersized, introverted, and chronically invisible. He wore faded Levi's, scuffed work boots that were 2 sizes too big, and a battered denim jacket. While the other kids debated where they were spending their spring breaks, Toby spent his free period sitting beneath the oak tree near the football field, his nose buried in a thick, leather-bound sketchbook. He didn't bother anyone. He just wanted to survive the 4 years of high school and get out. But in an ecosystem ruled by predators, being quiet is often mistaken for being weak. The apex predator of Oakhaven High was Trent Lawson. Trent was 17, the captain of the varsity football team, and the son of Richard Lawson, a man who owned half the commercial real estate in the county. Trent drove a brand-new BMW his father had bought him for getting a C average, and he walked with the arrogant swagger of a boy who had never been told no in his entire life. He was backed by his 2 shadows, Brad Higgins, a hulking linebacker with a mean streak, and Derek Shaw, a wiry, cruel-mouthed kid who lived to laugh at other people's misery. For the first 2 months of the semester, Trent ignored Toby, but bullies have a radar for isolation. It started small, a shoulder check in the hallway that sent Toby's books scattering across the linoleum, a stumbled foot in the cafeteria that resulted in Toby's lunch tray clattering to the floor. Through it all, Toby did exactly what he had been taught to do. He picked up his things, kept his mouth shut, and walked away. What Trent didn't understand was that Toby wasn't walking away out of fear. He was walking away out of preservation. Toby knew something about violence that Trent, in his sheltered country club life, could never comprehend. Toby lived in a dilapidated 2-bedroom house on the industrial edge of town, right near the county line. He didn't have a father to buy him a BMW or a mother to pack his lunches. They had both died in a car pile-up on Interstate 5 when Toby was 7. The only family Toby had left was his older brother, Jax. Jax Reynolds wasn't a PTA meeting kind of guardian. He was 28 years old, stood 6'3", and his arms were covered in ink that told stories polite society didn't want to hear. Jax was a fully patched member of the Hells Angels motorcycle club. When their parents died, the state had tried to put Toby in the foster system. Jax, who was just 20 at the time and already prospecting for the local charter, had fought like a rabid dog to keep his little brother. He took on grueling shifts at a local auto shop, proved he could provide a stable roof, and leaned on the Brotherhood of the club to help him navigate the legal red tape to the world. Jax Reaper. Reynolds was a terrifying figure. He rode a heavily modified Harley-Davidson Dyna, wore a leather cut adorned with the notorious winged death head and the 1% diamond patch, and carried an aura of absolute, uncompromising danger. But to Toby, Jax was the man who made sure there was hot food on the table, who checked his math homework with grease-stained fingers, and who had bought him that leather-bound sketchbook for his 15th birthday. You keep your head down in that rich kid school. Tobe, Jax had told him one evening, leaning against the frame of his Harley, a cigarette dangling from his lips. You get your education. You don't let them drag you into their drama. But if a man ever puts his hands on you, you let me know. We don't start fires. But we damn sure burn down the house if someone brings a match to ours. Toby had taken those words to heart. He absorbed Trent's petty harassments because he knew that if Jax ever found out, the retaliation wouldn't be a call to the principal's office. It would be catastrophic. The Hells Angels didn't operate on the rules of high school suspensions. They operated on respect, consequence, and a brutal code of loyalty. But Trent Lawson was getting bored. The minor bullying wasn't yielding the tears or the cowering submission he craved. Toby's stoic, silent glaring infuriated him. It made Trent feel small, and Trent hated feeling small. The tension simmered through November. Trent began to escalate. He started cornering Toby in the locker room before gym class, taunting him about his clothes. "Hey, Reynolds, you get those boots off a dead homeless guy." Brad and Derek would snicker like hyenas. Toby would just tie his sneakers, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached, and walk out. One afternoon, during a free period, Trent noticed Toby sketching under the oak tree. Trent marched over, Brad and Derek flanking him. "What are you always drawing in that stupid book, freak?" Trent demanded, snatching the sketchbook from Toby's hands. Toby stood up instantly, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Give it back, Trent." Trent flipped through the heavy, cream-colored pages. They were filled with intricate, masterful charcoal sketches of motorcycles, choppers, baggers, custom builds. Toby had a gift. He poured all his love for his brother and his brother's world into those pages. "Bikes!" Trent scoffed, a nasty smirk spreading across his face. "What do you think you're, some kind of tough biker trash? You're a joke. Reynolds, you probably take the bus." I said, "Give it back." Toby stepped forward, his voice dropping an octave. Trent shoved him hard in the chest. Toby stumbled backward, hitting the trunk of the oak tree. "Or what you're gonna cry, tell your daddy." "Oh wait, you don't have one." The cruelty was casual, tossed out like garbage. Brad and Derek howled with laughter. Trent threw the sketchbook into a nearby muddy puddle left over from the morning rain. He stepped on it, twisting his expensive sneaker into the leather cover, and then walked away, leaving Toby standing there, his hands shaking with a mix of profound grief and a terrifying, suppressed rage. Toby knelt in the mud and picked up the ruined book. The water had seeped through the edges, smudging the charcoal, ruining hours of work. It was the one beautiful thing he owned, a symbol of his brother's love, desecrated by a boy who had everything. Toby didn't tell Jax that night. He dried the pages with a hairdryer, hiding the evidence. He thought he could handle it. He thought he could just survive. He was wrong. The blood in the water had been sensed, and the sharks were circling. The incident that pushed everything over the edge happened on a dreary, grey Tuesday. The sky over Oakhaven was bruised with heavy rain clouds, matching the oppressive atmosphere inside the school. Gym class had ended, and the boys' locker room was emptying out. Toby intentionally lingered on the benches, pretending to struggle with a knot in his shoelace, waiting for the room to clear. He just wanted to change in peace and catch the bus back to the edge of town. But Trent, Brad, and Derek had also lingered. They were huddled near the showers, whispering, as the heavy metal doors banged shut behind the last departing student. The ambient noise of the locker room faded into a tense, echoing silence. Toby grabbed his bag and stood up, making a beeline for the exit. Brad Higgins stepped out, blocking the aisle. At 220 pounds of pure muscle, he was a wall of meat and malice. "Where are you going?" "Reynolds. We're not done hanging out." Toby tried to sidestep him. "Move!" "Brad." From behind, Derek shoved Toby hard between the shoulder blades. Toby pitched forward, dropping his bag. As it hit the tiled floor, the zipper burst open. Out tumbled his textbooks, a few pens, and the water-warped, leather-bound sketchbook. Trent walked over slowly, his cleats clacking against the wet tiles. He looked down at the sketchbook, then up at Toby. His eyes were devoid of any real humanity, just a bored teenager looking for a distraction. "I thought I put that piece of trash where it belonged," Trent sneered. He kicked the sketchbook across the floor. It skidded and hit the wall near the showers. Something inside Toby snapped. It wasn't just the bullying anymore. It was the blatant disrespect for the one thing that anchored him. He didn't think about his size, or the fact that it was 3 against 1. He launched himself at Trent, tackling the larger boy around the waist. For a split second, Trent was genuinely shocked as he crashed to the hard floor. Toby on top of him. Toby managed to land one solid, desperate punch to Trent's jaw. Then, the world caved in on him. Brad grabbed Toby by the collar of his denim jacket and hauled him backward, slamming him brutally into a row of metal lockers. The impact knocked the wind out of Toby's lungs in a sickening gasp. Before he could slide to the floor, Derek punched him in the stomach. Trent scrambled to his feet, his face red with fury. He touched his jaw, feeling the sting. The golden boy had been struck by the invisible kid. His ego couldn't handle it. "Hold him!" Trent hissed. Brad pinned Toby's arms against the lockers. Toby struggled frantically, kicking and twisting, but he was no match for the linebacker's strength. Trent stepped up and drove his fist into Toby's eye. The crack of knuckles against bone echoed sharply in the damp room. Toby groaned, his vision flashing brilliantly white, then swirling with dark spots. "You think you can touch me?" Trent spat, punching him again, this time in the ribs. Toby heard a sickening pop, and a flare of agonizing pain radiated through his side. They didn't stop there. For 3 agonizing minutes, they used Toby as a punching bag. Derek kicked the back of his knees, bringing him down to the wet tile, and Trent delivered a final, vicious kick to Toby's side as he lay curled in a fetal position, desperately trying to protect his head. "Let's go!" Trent finally panted, shaking out his hand. "Leave the trash where it is." They grabbed their gym bags. On his way out, Trent picked up Toby's sketchbook, ripped a handful of pages out of the center, and let them flutter down onto Toby's bruised and bleeding body. The heavy metal door slammed shut, leaving Toby alone in the deafening silence of the locker room. It took Toby 20 minutes just to stand up. His left eye was already swollen shut, a deep purplish-black mass. His lip was split, dripping blood onto his chin. Every breath he took felt like a rusty knife twisting between his ribs. Slowly, painstakingly, he gathered the torn pages of his sketchbook, shoved them into his bag, and dragged himself out of the school. He didn't take the bus. He couldn't let anyone see him like this. He walked the 3 miles home in the freezing drizzle, clutching his side, praying to whatever God was listening that Jax would be at the clubhouse and not at home. If he could just get to the bathroom, ice his face, and hide in his room, he could lie and say he fell off his bike. But luck was never on Toby's side. As he turned onto his street, he heard the deep, unmistakable, rhythmic rumble of a V-twin engine. Sitting in the driveway of their small house, gleaming under the porch light, was Jax's diner. Toby froze. His heart hammered, sending fresh waves of pain through his broken ribs. He considered turning around and sleeping in the woods. But it was raining harder now. He had no choice. He pulled the collar of his jacket up, kept his head down, and unlocked the front door. The house smelled of stale coffee, leather, and gun scrubber. Jax was sitting at the small kitchen table, a disassembled carburetor laid out on a towel in front of him. He was wearing a plain black t-shirt, his heavily tattooed arms corded with muscle as he worked a small screwdriver. His leather cut hung over the back of his chair, the crimson and gold Hell's Angels patches glowing under the cheap fluorescent kitchen light. "You're late," Jax said, without looking up, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "Dinner's on the stove." "Bus ran late," Toby mumbled, keeping his back to his brother as he made a beeline for the hallway. Jax paused. The screwdriver stopped moving. In the MC world, survival depends on hyper-awareness. You notice when the air changes in a room. You notice when a voice trembles. "Toby, stop." Toby froze at the edge of the hallway. Jax set the tool down. The scrape of his chair pushing back sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. Heavy boots crossed the linoleum floor. Jax clamped a massive hand on Toby's shoulder and turned him around. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Jax looked at his little brother. He took in the swollen, black and blue eye, the crusted blood on his split lip, the pale, clammy skin, and the way Toby was hunched over, clutching his ribs. Jax didn't yell. He didn't gasp. His face went entirely blank. It was a terrifying, dead-eyed stillness that Toby had only seen once before the night a rival crew had tried to firebomb the MC's clubhouse. It was the face of the Reaper. "Who?" Jax said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. I fell. Jax, I was walking by the bleachers and I tripped. Do not lie to me. Jax's voice dropped dangerously low, vibrating with a lethal, barely contained fury. Look at my eyes. Toby, tell me who did this to you. Toby started to cry. The pain, the humiliation, the exhaustion, it all flooded out. He dropped his bag, and it fell open. The torn, muddy pages of the sketchbook spilled onto the floor between Jax's boots. Jax slowly knelt down. He picked up a torn page. It was a charcoal drawing of Jax on his Harley. There was a bloody boot print right in the center of the paper. Jax stood up, his jaw ticking. Give me the names. Jax, please, Toby sobbed, terrified of what his brother would do. They're rich kids. Their parents run the town. You'll go to jail. Names. Trent, Toby whispered. Defeated. Trent Lawson, Brad Higgins, Derek Shaw. Jax committed the names to memory. He reached out with a surprisingly gentle hand and wiped a tear from Toby's uninjured eye. Go to the bathroom. Get the first aid kit. I'm taking you to Doc Henderson to get those ribs taped up. Doc Henderson was an old physician who kept off-the-books hours for the club. What are you going to do? Toby asked, his voice shaking. Jax turned away, walking over to the kitchen chair. He picked up his leather cut and slipped it over his shoulders, the death head settling heavily onto his back. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket. I'm going to make a phone call, Jax said, dialing a number. The phone rang once before a deep voice answered on the other end. Yeah. Brother, the voice said. It was big. Dan Miller, the sergeant-at-arms for the charter. Dan, call a church meeting. Tonight, Jack said. His eyes locked onto the bloody boot print on the drawing. We have a local pest control issue, and tell the boys. We're riding heavy. The Hells Angels clubhouse sat on a sprawling, fenced-in compound just outside the city limits. It was a fortress of corrugated steel, cinder block, and high-definition security cameras. Inside, the main hall smelled of stale beer, motor oil, and cheap cigar smoke. By midnight, the long, heavy oak table in the center of the room was surrounded by 20 fully patched members. The atmosphere was thick with a dangerous, electric tension. Jax stood at the head of the table, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the wood. He had just finished telling them what happened to Toby. He laid the bloody, boot-printed drawing on the table like a piece of damning evidence in a murder trial. At the opposite end of the table sat Clay Donovan. Clay was the president of the charter, a 55-year-old veteran biker with a silver beard, eyes like chipped flint, and a mind like a steel trap. He had spent his life navigating the treacherous waters of outlaw motorcycle clubs and the federal agents who hunted them. He didn't survive this long by being reckless. 3 rich kids, Clay rumbled, his voice cutting through the angry murmurs of the room. And one of them is Richard Lawson's boy. I don't give a damn if he's the mayor's boy. Clay! Jax growled, his chest heaving. They broke his ribs. They nearly blinded his left eye. I want permission to handle it. Big Dan Miller, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, shook his massive head. You lay a finger on those kids, Jax, and the local PD will have an excuse to raid this compound by morning. Lawson has the police chief in his back pocket. It's a bad play. So what? Jax snapped, slamming his fist on the table. I do nothing, I let them use my blood like a punching bag. Nobody said nothing. Brother, Clay said softly. The room instantly fell dead silent. When Clay spoke quietly, it meant someone's world was about to end. We are Hell's Angels. We don't throw cheap punches in a schoolyard. We dismantle lives. We go after the roots. Clay looked over at a younger, scruffy biker sitting behind a glowing laptop in the corner. His road name was Wyatt, and before he had found the Brotherhood, he had been a highly skilled corporate IT specialist. "Wyatt," Clay ordered, "dig into Richard Lawson. I want everything. Tax returns, offshore accounts, property deeds, phone records. A man who owns half the county doesn't get there playing by the rules. Find the rot. For 48 hours. The club moved in complete silence. Toby stayed home from school, nursing his injuries under Jax's watchful eye. He was terrified of the impending violence, but Jax reassured him that the club had a plan. Meanwhile, Wyatt struck gold. On Thursday night, Wyatt projected a series of documents onto the white wall of the clubhouse. "Richard Lawson isn't just a bully's father," Wyatt explained, tapping his keyboard. "He's a ghost landlord. He's been buying up low-income housing on the east side, evicting the tenants illegally, and selling the land to a commercial developer at a massive markup. But here's the twist: he's been using non-union, undocumented labor to do the demolitions, paying them cash under the table, and cooking his books to hide the money." Clay leaned forward, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his weathered face. "Tax evasion, real estate fraud, money laundering. It gets better," Wyatt smirked. "Two of the contracting firms he screwed over last year. They pay protection to the local Russian syndicate. Lawson owes the Brat for nearly $2 million, and he's been dodging their phone calls." The room erupted into low, menacing laughter. Richard Lawson had built a house of cards. "All right." Clay stood up, adjusting his leather cut. "Jax, you and the boys are going to have a little chat with the high schoolers. Scare the absolute hell out of them. But do not leave a mark. Dan and I are going to pay Mr. Lawson a visit at his corporate office. We're going to show him exactly what happens when his spoiled kid brings a war to our doorstep." Friday afternoon at Oak Haven High School was usually a scene of chaotic joy. The final bell rang, and hundreds of privileged teenagers flooded out of the double-glass doors, eager for the weekend. Trent Lawson, Brad, and Derek swaggered toward the student parking lot, laughing loudly. Trent was tossing the keys to his BMW in the air. "Party at my dad's lake house this weekend," Trent bragged. "Half the cheerleading squad is coming." They never made it to the car. A low, thunderous vibration began to shake the asphalt. It started as a distant rumble and quickly grew into an ear-splitting, mechanical roar. The students in the parking lot froze, turning their heads toward the entrance. Rolling up the main driveway, in a tight, disciplined V formation, were 50 heavily customized Harley-Davidsons. The sun glinted off the chrome exhaust pipes and the menacing, winged death head patches on the backs of their leather cuts. The sheer volume of the V-twin engines was deafening, vibrating in the chests of everyone standing there. The security guards at the front gate took one look at the procession and wisely stepped back, reaching for their radios but doing nothing to stop them. The bikers didn't rev their engines or shout. They operated with terrifying, military precision. They rolled into the parking lot and formed a massive, impenetrable circle completely surrounding Trent's BMW. Kickstands went down in unison with a loud cluck. The engines were killed, and a heavy, suffocating silence fell over the entire schoolyard. 50 grown men, covered in tattoos and wearing the colors of the most notorious motorcycle club in the world, sat silently on their bikes, staring at 3 terrified teenagers. Trent's face drained of all color. The arrogant swagger evaporated instantly. Brad Higgins, the hulking linebacker, looked like he was about to vomit. Derek was visibly shaking. From the center of the formation, Jax dismounted. He didn't rush. He walked with heavy, deliberate steps toward the three boys. He towered over Trent, his dark eyes burning with a cold, terrifying fire. "You're Trent," Jax said. His voice wasn't loud, but in the dead silence of the parking lot, it carried perfectly. I... Trent stammered, his eyes darting frantically for help. No one was coming. The teachers, the students, the security, they were all paralyzed. "I'm Toby Reynolds' older brother," Jax stated, stopping inches from Trent's face. "I saw what you did to his ribs. I saw what you did to his eye." "It was a mistake," Trent whispered, tears of sheer panic welling in his eyes. "We were just messing around." Jax reached out, moving so fast Trent flinched violently, expecting a punch. Instead, Jax simply grabbed the collar of Trent's expensive polo shirt, pulling him in close. "Listen to me very carefully, because I will only say this once," Jax whispered, his voice a razor blade. "If you, or your friends, ever look at my brother again, if you breathe the same air as him, if you so much as walk down the same hallway, I won't just beat you. I will follow you into the dark, and I will take away everything you have ever loved. Do we have an understanding?" Trent nodded frantically, a pathetic sob escaping his throat. "Good." Jax released him, slapping his chest lightly. "Now go home and ask your daddy how his afternoon went." At that exact moment, across town, in a sleek, glass-walled office, Richard Lawson was sweating through his tailored Italian suit. Clay Donovan and Big Dan Miller were sitting on the plush leather sofas in Lawson's office. The door was locked. Lawson's personal security detail was lying unconscious in the hallway. Clay tossed a heavy black USB flash drive onto Lawson's mahogany desk. "What is this?" Lawson demanded, his voice trembling as he looked at the two massive bikers. "You can't just barge in here. That drive," Clay said calmly, lighting a thick cigar, "contains every deleted email, every hidden offshore account, and the exact locations of the undocumented workers you've been exploiting. It also contains the financial ledgers proving you stole $2 million from the Russian mob." Lawson's jaw dropped. The blood vanished from his face. "Your son, Trent, severely beat a boy named Toby Reynolds," Clay continued, blowing a stream of blue smoke toward the ceiling. "Toby is under the protection of the Hells Angels. Your boy brought a world of hurt down on your head. Richard—" "I'll pay you," Lawson blurted out, panic fully taking over. "Whatever you want. 100,000, 200. Dan laughed, a deep, rumbling sound. "We don't want your dirty money. Suit. Here are our terms." Clay leaned forward, his eyes turning lethal. "You are going to quietly sell your real estate holdings in this town. You are going to take your family, and you are going to move out of this state by the end of the month. If you stay, that flash drive goes to the FBI, and a copy goes to the Bratva." Lawson slumped in his chair. A broken man. His empire, his reputation, his entire life in Oakhaven destroyed in a single afternoon because his son couldn't leave a quiet kid alone. "You have 30 days. Richard," Clay said, standing up. "Start packing." The following Monday, Toby walked through the front doors of Oakhaven High School. The bruising around his eye was fading to a dull yellow, and his ribs were tightly wrapped. But he walked a little taller. As he walked down the main hallway, the sea of students parted. There were no whispers. There were no snickers. There was only absolute, profound respect born of absolute terror. Trent, Brad, and Derek were nowhere to be seen. Rumour had it they had been abruptly unenrolled, and the Lawson family's sprawling estate had a "for sale" sign hammered into the manicured lawn over the weekend. Toby walked out to the football field during his free period. He sat down under his favourite oak tree. Reaching into his bag, he pulled out a brand-new, beautiful leather-bound sketchbook. Jax had given it to him the night before. Toby opened to the first blank page, picked up his charcoal pencil, and began to draw a winged death head, sketching the emblem of the men who had shown the world that true power isn't about how loud you shout. It's about the shadows that stand silently behind you. Wow, what an incredible twist bullying the quiet kid cost an entire family their corrupt empire. If you enjoyed this intense, real-life story of karma, loyalty, and the ultimate payback, please hit that like button, share and subscribe to the channel.